Okay. Thanks a lot for coming in. This is the Network Breakfast. Today we're going to hear from Mike Bentley. So we're going to forego our 1 minute introductions, and we're going to give all the time to Mike because, as we say in the trenches, ask Mike, and he usually knows. And today he's going to share what he knows with us, his thoughts and his thoughts about as we end 2020. So we're going to introduce Mike Bentley. Good morning, Mike. Please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, gang. And I want to get right to it. As this year comes to an end, I've heard so many people say good riddance to 2020. And maybe you feel that way as well. It certainly has been a year of sacrifice. It's been a year of suffering, some physical suffering, others emotional suffering, not being able to spend time with family members and loved ones. It's been a time of personal loss. Just a couple of weeks ago, I have a cousin that's younger than me, 61 years old, who contacted COVID. A week later, he's dead. His father, 1 week after his only son dies of COVID, has a stroke, and my uncle passes away. So I've encountered some personal loss myself during this time. Heartache, financial difficulty, people having to close their businesses, losing jobs. There's been certainly fear that seems to be behind every decision that we make. There's been social strife. There's been political strife. It's been a year full of grumblings, but we haven't had much gratitude to share. I've even heard some people say that they feel that the year was totally lost. It was a wasted year. Now, most of us here this morning in our presentation are from my generation, and you remember the late columnist, writer, humorist, Andy Rooney. He's probably most well remembered on 60 Minutes, where he would have about a little 5-minute segment full of wit, full of humor, and full of wisdom. And one of the sayings that sort of resonated with me was this one: I've learned that life is like a roll of toilet paper. The closer it gets to the end, the faster it goes. So as we have a roll of toilet paper, you'll notice that the revolutions are faster as the roll gets smaller. My father, who I had the opportunity to spend the weekend with, he's going to be 94 in 2 more weeks. He uses this expression, and he did once again this weekend: time keeps a moving on. And I think the words of Andy Rooney, I've learned that life is like a roll of toilet paper. The closer it gets to the end, the faster it goes, reminds us of the brevity of life, the shortness of life. You know, there are only so many sheets in this roll of toilet paper. And when we get to the end, it's all gone. So during our time this morning, I want to change our focus from being business related. And because of the holiday season and the end of the year, I wanted our time this morning to be more devotional. And I think my Jewish and Christian friends will not take offense to me referring to the words of the psalmist. And when you have an opportunity today, take the scriptures and just read the 90th Psalm, Psalm 90. Psalm 90 is a very unique psalm for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's the oldest of the Psalms. A lot of people think the Psalms are listed in chronological order. That's not the case. There are 150 Psalms, And Psalm 90 happens to be the oldest of the Psalms. It's the oldest of the Psalms because it's unique by its writer. A lot of people think that King David wrote the Psalms. Well, out of the 150 Psalms, David's believed to have written about 75 of them, half of them. This Psalm is unique. This Psalm is the oldest because it's actually the words of Moses. It is a prayer of Moses. It starts out, a prayer of Moses, a man of God. Now, to better understand this psalm, and I'm going to try to give you a quick historical review here, Moses's life can easily be separated into thirds by 40s. Scripture tells us that Moses died at the age of 120. The first 40 years of his life was spent in Egypt. We remember the story of the baby and the bulrushes, and he was taken into Pharaoh's household and lived in Pharaoh's household and rose in rank and authority. But then he slew an Egyptian to defend one of the Hebrew people, and he fled for his life. So the first 40 years was spent in Egypt. The next 40 years, he ended up being a herdsman for his father-in-law, who was a priest by the name of Jethro. He married Jethro's daughter, and he tended to herds for 40 years. And then he had the burning bush experience, and God sent him back to Egypt to deliver his people. So the next 40 years were spent being a herdsman, and then he goes back to Egypt. We all remember that there were 10 plagues, let my people go. The Exodus occurred. The final plague was the Passover beginning, the blood on the doorpost, and we had the crossing of the Red Sea. And the last 40-year segment is actually considered the wandering in the wilderness, where for 40 years, God's people sort of meandered through the desert, waiting to get into the promised land. Now, during this 40-year period, Moses encountered a lot of negativity. You think that we've had a bad year. He had grumblings, he had dissension, he had people rebelling against him. He saw famine. God provided manna for the people. Then they complained about the manna. God provided quail. The people complained about his leadership. At Kadesh, God had instructed him to send in 12 spies to spy out Canaan, the promised land. And we all know the story. The 12 came back after 40 days. 10 of them said, no way should we go into this promised land, because the people there, they're big, they're strong, and they're going to squash us like grasshoppers. But 2 said, we should go in and take the land. It's full of fruit and milk and honey, and it's a wonderful place. That was Caleb and Joshua. Well, the people sided with the 10, and they started to say, things are really bad here. You know, we've struggled for food. We've struggled for water. Boy, I wish I was back in Egypt. We should all select a new leader and go back to Egypt. So God's judgment on his people was that no one over the age of 20 would ever set foot in the promised land. Therefore, for 40 years, Moses witnessed the death of his contemporaries, and only that young generation would be able to set foot into the promised land. So that's sort of the history behind Moses writing this. Moses is writing this prayer at the end of his life, near the 120th year of his life. And he's reflecting back over all of the negativity that he's had to endure over the past 40 years. You think we've had it bad over the last 9 or 10 months? Moses had to deal with much worse. And yet, the pivotal verse in this psalm is actually verse 12. And in verse 12, Moses says these words, "So teach us to number our days, that we might obtain a heart of wisdom." So teach us to number our days, that we might get a heart of wisdom. About 20 years ago, I received a phone call from a CFO client of mine out in Lake County. And he called me to inform me that he was going to be retiring in the next week to 10 days. I knew nothing of this. It caught me by surprise because this gentleman, about 20 years my senior, was someone that I really respected. He was very well-read, well-educated, very polite, treated me with great courtesy and respect. And I felt that I needed to meet with him one last time, and I invited him to lunch. So I drove out to their business and picked him up, and we went to his favorite lunch spot in Mentor. And pretty much all I can remember from that lunch meeting with him was him pulling out a little packet of vitamins. And before his meal came, he started to take these vitamins, and he was explaining to me the importance of taking care of his body and putting the right things into his body. And then he started to tell me that he was moving to Hawaii. He owned a property in Hawaii and was actually having a custom home built. And I just sat there thinking, wow, aren't you lucky? Isn't that great to be able to pick up and leave this Northeast Ohio crappy weather and go and live in paradise? Isn't that great? A few days later, I received a phone call, and it shocked me. Howard was dead. Howard, who was 65 years old, was cleaning out his garage in Painesville Township as they were getting ready to list it. And he didn't feel well. He went in to lay down in bed, and he never woke up. There is not a week in my life that I probably don't think about Howard and think about that lunch meeting and think about the anticipation and excitement that he had about his dream being fulfilled. And that had a major impact to me personally. And I sort of started to live, and my kids know this saying well because I repeat it to them all the time. Why plan for your whole life to one day live? You see, that's what Howard did. Howard had planned his whole life, had saved up to one day move to his dream home in Hawaii, and he never made it there. Why plan for your whole life to one day live? And that's sort of what Moses is saying in this prayer as he looks back at all of the suffering and the hardships and the death that he witnessed. So teach us to number our days, that we might obtain wisdom. I know that some of you won't like this exercise. I've invited you to, later on in the day, just read through the 90th Psalm. But I also want to challenge you to do something else. I want you to literally number your days. Every year, the United Nations and World Health Organization releases their life tables. And interestingly, this year, I believe the United States ranks 35th in the world as far as life expectancy. And that life expectancy is just a fraction under 79 years. So the average life expectancy, we'll say, is 79 years. And based on that figure, to date, I have lived 23,352 days so far. And if God is merciful to me, based on that calculation of 79 years, I now have 5,478 days left. And you know, there's nothing humanly I really can do to change God's plan for me. You know, it's interesting. In the book of Job, we read that man's days are determined, and God has decreed the number of months and set the limits that cannot be exceeded. So the question is, how many sheets do you have left on your toilet roll of life? You know, starting out here, I see that Angel Soft, you start out with 429 sheets per roll. Here we have Snow Soft with 300 sheets per roll. And here at the Southern Command, I'm by Harris Teeter, local grocery chain, and I have in this packet 284 sheets per roll. But the question is, how many sheets do you have left in your roll? And with that in mind, and everything that we've gone through this past year, the hardships, the suffering, the sacrifice, ask yourself, have you been a grumbler, or has your heart been filled with gratitude? It's interesting, as Moses sort of completes this prayer in the 90th Psalm, in verse 14, he says to the Lord, satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad all of our days. So with so much negativity that we've been focused on in 2020, I'd encourage you, even today, to just make a list and write down 10 things that you're grateful for, that we have gratitude in our hearts. Are you a grumbler, or are you grateful? The second thing I encourage you to do as we close is ask you, how are you going to use the final sheets on your toilet roll, the final years of your life? Are you going to have an impact on your family? Are you going to have an impact on your community? What legacy are you going to leave? You know, I was touched yesterday by a phone call by a former member of the network breakfast. You know, many of you remember Ruben Grossberg. And Ruben just called me to wish me Merry Christmas. Here, a Jewish friend of mine calling me out of the blue, saying that he was thinking about me, and he just wanted to wish me and my family a Merry Christmas. That was the purpose of his call. So what kind of impact are you going to have before your roll goes empty? So those are my devotional thoughts, not business thoughts, but thoughts of life that regardless as to the circumstances we might face in our so-called wilderness wandering of 2020, we still have a lot to be thankful for and to be grateful for. So thanks again for your time this morning.
Amen.
Thank you, Mike.
That was great.
It was great.
Very, very good.
Together.
That
Very
was.
It was worth getting up the middle of the night for.
Certainly
Are
was.
you muted?
Arie, you're muted on your computer. No. Hopefully he won't sound like a chipmunk when he unmutes.
Right.
It is the middle of the night.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah. Hello.
Okay.
For you, maybe, but others, we're working.
Yeah. I got another Zoom meeting at 8:30 with my manager.
Okay.
You got 3 minutes, Marty.
Marty, did you have a good year?
Yeah. Actually, we looked at 5 houses Sunday. My clients narrowed it down to 2 for a second look. And the house that they liked best was already under contract by somebody.
Oh my God. Wow.
So we're looking at another one.
You know what's pretty interesting? I get Crane's business, and yesterday, I don't know whether any of you people get it. In November, now this is northeastern Ohio. Everybody says they can't find a job. There was 15,068 jobs available in northeastern Ohio.
They're there if you look.
They're there if you look.
Yeah. So several years ago, Lou Holtz, the famous coach for Notre Dame, said the difference between the players, the football players of 25 years ago and the players of today. 25 years ago, they were interested in obligations and responsibilities. The players of today are interested in rights and privileges. That's the difference. Of most of our issues come from the fact that most people are looking for rights and privileges rather than responsibilities and obligations. That was a brilliant statement by Lou Holtz, and I'm not sure how he's taken these days, but that's probably not politically correct speech. But I wanted to say that as part of what I think of when as we're closing out 2020 and what problems we could have had and that we didn't, rather than the problems we do have and we're having a rough time dealing with. There's a lot of things that could have happened that would have made it much, much, much worse. But we live in the best country in the world, and it will remain so no matter what. I want to thank Mike once again for a wonderful presentation. And I want to thank each of you, Jeff, Chris Walters, Marty, Arie, thank you for being persistent in getting in and seeing us and letting us see you, Arie.
Sure.
I just got a phone call, you believe it? And so we can wrap it up and let everybody get on with their day. For Arie, it's the middle of the day or the middle of the night, I mean. And for the rest,
It's morning. Now it's morning.
okay, now it's morning. All right, now we're all on the same page. Okay, so for those on this side, I hope you had a wonderful, happy Hanukkah and everything that means to you. And for my Christian friends, I hope the Christmas Eve and Christmas Day are blessed for you and your families. And at that moment, we'll know that who's in control. I love the song, God is in control. And for me, that's what it means. And I thank God every day that something happens. I wake up, and that's the first thing that happens good in that day. And I like saying it. I like repeating it. And I hope other people around me know that how I feel about that. And thanks so much for everything. Thank you, Mike, Jeff, Chris,
Yes.
Marty, and Arie. And at this time, we're going to bid you a fond adieu. And we'll see you next week, next Tuesday morning, 7:30 for the network breakfast. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Merry Christmas to all of my Christian
you.
friends.
Thank you.
Merry
Thank you.
Christmas and Happy New Year.
Yeah. Happy New Year, everybody.
Yes, and Happy New Year. Thanks.